London, May 19, 1536. The air hung heavy like breath caught in a dying chest. Fog rolled low across the Thames, as if the city itself wished to shroud what was coming in silence. The Tower of London stood like a graveyard monument, its ancient stones damp with dew, its walls echoing the weight of centuries and secrets. Beneath the shadow of that fortress, a scaffold had risen. Not the usual towering gallows, but something lower, quieter, built with a foreign hand and mind. It was not the axe today, it was the sword, imported from Calais along with a French executioner whose blade was known to sing through flesh before a final breath could flee the lips. And this death, this cold, deliberate death, was not meant for a common criminal or fallen noble. No, this death was for a crowned queen, Anne Boleyn. She who had once made kings kneel and the church tremble. She who Henry VIII had torn the world for. Now the very soil he ruled was being prepared to drink her blood. It is said the body feels its death before it arrives. Anne had been confined within the tower for 17 long days, each hour stretched with whispers of betrayal and the slow decay of hope. Outside her chamber, guards murmured and courtiers kept their distance, but inside, Anne moved with a strange kind of grace, not the frantic despair of the condemned, but something colder, sharper. A queen until the end, even as her title was stripped, even as the crown she once wore was boxed away, ready to be melted into forgetfulness. She dressed herself slowly, a dark gray cloak, fur-lined, regal but not ostentatious, beneath it a red bodice, not for beauty but for pragmatism. Red would hide the blood. Her final rebellion would be quiet, controlled, a woman choosing how she would be remembered in the moments after her end. Her ladies wept. Anne did not. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and offered a half-smile, a haunting, bone-deep acknowledgement of her fate. "I hear the executioner is very good," she said lightly, her fingers brushing her slender throat. "I have a little neck." That neck had once held the weight of a crown, forged in fire and betrayal, because Anne was not merely a woman who loved a king. She was the match that set Europe ablaze. Henry had been married when he first saw her, his queen, Catherine of Aragon, watching as her husband's eyes drifted to a young woman with dark eyes and a mind sharper than any blade.
Anne refused to be his mistress. She made herself a prize, and in doing so she fractured the very church that claimed to govern monarchs. Henry broke from Rome, created his own Church of England, crowned himself the supreme head, all to possess her. And in return, Anne gave him more than her body. She gave him Elizabeth, a daughter with the fire of her mother and the ruthless will of her father. But Anne gave him no sang. And in that failure, the world turned against her.
The charges were fabricated: adultery, incest, treason, lies stitched together with urgency and cruelty. Men she had laughed with, danced with, spoken to once in passing, they were condemned alongside her. 5 executed before her. She had watched them fall, one by one, their heads severed and their names swallowed by scandal. Now it was her turn. As Anne stepped out into the morning light, the clouds broke just enough to cast a pale, silver hue across the courtyard. Spectators gathered in silence. Nobles, servants, traitors-in-waiting, all of them watching. Not a queen, not a villain, but a woman who had once changed history with a glance. She moved slowly to the scaffold. No trembling, no screams, just the eerie quiet of someone who had already buried her past and made peace with her end. The French swordsman waited, his blade hidden behind his back. This was part of the performance. He would call for a sword, and while her eyes searched for it, he would strike. Swift, merciful, precise. Anne knelt, speaking her final words. She asked for forgiveness. She praised the king who had sentenced her to die. It was not sincerity, it was survival, of memory, of legacy, a woman silencing the rumors with dignity in death. And then, without warning, the blade sang. It said that the human brain may remain conscious for up to 8 seconds after decapitation. If that is true, then Anne Boleyn saw her death from both sides. Perhaps in those seconds her mind still fired, still searched. Perhaps she saw the sky for one last time, or remembered the laughter of her daughter, or heard again the king whispering promises he never kept. Or perhaps, for the first time in years, she felt peace. True peace. But Anne's death was not the end. It was a spark, a warning, a curse, for what followed was bloodier, darker. Henry would marry again, Jane Seymour, who died in childbirth, then Anne of Cleves, who escaped by cleverness, then Catherine Howard, another beheaded queen. The Tower would drink more blood, but it would never forget the taste of Anne's, the woman who changed a nation, who bore a queen, and who died alone beneath the stone gaze of a godless king. The people whispered of ghosts, that her spirit lingered in the Tower Green, searching for her lost head, that sometimes, on misty mornings, a figure in gray could be seen walking the path from her prison cell to the place where the scaffold once stood, and sometimes, only sometimes, a faint voice could be heard, soft and resolute. "I have a little neck." But Anne Boleyn's story is not just one of death. It is a mirror, a reflection of how power corrupts, how obsession distorts, how even love can become a weapon. She was not innocent. She played the game, but she did not deserve the ending she received. And in her fall we glimpse the fragility of thrones, the lies buried beneath royal tapestries, and the cruel truth that in history, even the most beautiful crowns are stained with blood. There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than screams, when what is not written in the records weighs heavier than what is. After the execution of Anne Boleyn, the stone corridors of the Tower of London did not rest. The air stayed thick, not just with mourning, but with a kind of unfinished business. Because what had happened was not merely the death of a woman, it was the unraveling of something deeper, a fracture, a turning point, one that would ripple far beyond the Tudor court, through centuries, haunting every dark corner where power hides its sins. And yet, Anne's fall was only the beginning of a cruel pattern, one where blood soaked the throne and secrets were buried in unmarked graves. 3 years later, another queen knelt at the same place, Catherine Howard, barely 20, a child in a world built by wolves, cousin to Anne Boleyn, and just like her, caught in the teeth of Henry VIII's monstrous appetites. Catherine was lively, warm, ill-prepared for the danger of being loved by a king who had turned cold with age and paranoia. Her crime? Passion. She had once been touched by another man before Henry. A young heart, foolish in a palace of vipers. When the rumors spread, true or not, they sealed her fate. She was dragged from her bed at Hampton Court, screaming, begging to speak to the king. But Henry would not see her. He had become a man who believed in silence more than justice. The girl he once adored was now just another ghost, waiting for a blade. When Catherine was led to the block, it said she cried out that she died a queen, but would have rather died the wife of the man she truly loved. Her voice, trembling but defiant, disappeared into the morning mist. The scaffold had been cleaned since Anne, but the ground beneath it had not forgotten. Blood clings to soil, especially royal blood. And still, the king endured, grew heavier, more rotted from the inside. His leg ulcer festered, his heart darkened. Each marriage left him more monstrous than the last. Those who lived around him grew quieter, more careful. The court became a theater of fear, where smiling too widely or speaking too boldly could cost your life. Henry VIII, once the Golden Prince of England, was now a bloated, limping tyrant. and yet no one dared challenge him, because by then, power had stopped pretending to be noble. It had embraced its hunger. But this darkness was not unique to England. All across history, royal bloodlines dripped with secrets and strange forbidden rituals masked as divine right. In France, they whispered of King Charles VI, who believed he was made of glass. He walked carefully through his palace halls, wrapped in protective clothing, terrified that he might shatter. The madness was not poetic. It was inherited, twisted through generations of inbreeding and unchecked power. While peasants starved, kings raved and bled and burned. Power had become its own form of illness.
In the courts of Russia, another tale unfolded, far more brutal. Ivan Charto of Moscow, Ivan the Terrible, a boy molded by torture, crowned by cruelty. He watched nobles poison his mother, saw betrayal in every eye, and eventually trusted no one. He created the Oprichnina, a black-robed army of terror that rode through the streets of Russia, slaughtering families, boiling enemies alive, cutting off noses and ears to send a message. The Tsar sees everything.
One night, in a fit of rage, Ivan struck his own son with a metal rod, killing the only heir he had ever truly loved. And still, the people called him divinely chosen, because when power slips from the hands of the people, they begin to worship their executioner. But let us go deeper still, beneath the thrones and crowns, past the gilded walls of palaces, into the hidden chambers where truth was kept behind locked doors. In the courts of medieval Europe, royal physicians practiced medicine that would kill more often than cure. Ailments were treated with arsenic, lead, and mercury. Bleeding was common, holes bored into the skull to let out evil spirits. And no one dared question it, because questioning the doctor was questioning the king's judgment, and that was treason. King Charles II of England, for example, believed in king's drops, a potion containing powdered human skull. When he fell ill, his doctors gave him over 50 treatments in the last days of his life, including bleeding him of 4 pints of blood, forcing boiling pigeon broth down his throat and rubbing his body with dung. He died screaming, not from his illness but from the medicine meant to save him. And still the practice continued, because in history, tradition is a stubborn executioner. And yet, perhaps the most disturbing truths are not those of how royals ruled, but how they cleaned themselves. In Versailles, the center of French elegance, nobles would relieve themselves in stairwells and corners, wiping with lace or not at all. The palace had hundreds of rooms, but almost no bathrooms. Perfume wasn't for beauty, it was armor, to mask the smell of decay and filth hidden beneath powdered wigs and velvet robes. Marie Antoinette herself once confessed that she bathed only a few times a year. In ancient Rome, public toilets were shared spaces where men and women sat side by side, cleaning themselves with shared sponges soaked in vinegar. Infections were common, hygiene was a myth, and those who questioned it were seen as vulgar or unrefined. Because history doesn't care about comfort, it cares about power, and often those in power reeked of rot, both literally and spiritually. And all of this leads to one quiet truth. Behind every empire, there is a room no one speaks of, a place where blood was spilled, where screams were muffled, where rituals were performed under the guise of religion or medicine or justice. Whether it was Anne Boleyn's whispered last words, or Catherine Howard's desperate plea, or the silent agony of kings losing their minds, these are not distant stories. They are warnings. History doesn't just repeat, it remembers. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the tower's ancient stones, you can still hear her footsteps. Not Anne, or Catherine, or Jane, but history itself. Walking, waiting, watching. There are places in the world where silence feels unnatural, where the air presses against your skin like a memory trying to force itself into the present. In these places, history isn't gone. It isn't buried. It lingers, like smoke after fire, like breath still trapped inside the walls. The Tower of London is one of them. But there are others, older, stranger, lost to time, yet whispering truths that no textbook ever dared print. Because some histories were never meant to be remembered, civilizations that vanished overnight, rituals performed in darkness, entire cultures swallowed by the earth, leaving behind only fragments, bones, curses, bloodstains carved into stone. And when we stumble across them now, we call them mysteries. But they were warnings, forgotten not by accident, but on purpose. Long before England crowned its tyrant, before Rome built its marble empire, there was Cataloic, a vast city in ancient Anatolia, over 9,000 years old. No streets, no palaces, homes stacked like honeycomb, entered from rooftops, and beneath each home, graves. Families buried their dead under their floors, sleeping atop their ancestors, infants, elders, sometimes entire households. And on the walls, art, images of vultures feeding on headless bodies, not gods, not kings, just death, drawn over and over again, as if to remind each generation, no one escapes the ground. When archaeologists uncovered the site, they found skulls deliberately separated, painted and displayed. Why? To honor? To intimidate? No one knows. But the message was clear. In that city, the dead were never truly gone. They were neighbors, roommates, watchers. But Catalhoyuk is not alone. Across the oceans, deep within the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya built cities that touched the sky, temples where time itself was measured with brutal precision. They charted eclipses, decoded Venus, carved calendars that stretched into infinity. And yet, at the heart of their brilliance was blood. Human sacrifice wasn't cruelty, it was currency, to feed the gods, to balance the stars. In the ball courts of Chichen Itza, players competed not for glory, but for death. The winners, not the losers, were offered to the gods, an honor soaked in terror, their hearts cut from their chests while still beating. The priests used obsidian knives, sharper than surgical steel, slicing flesh like parchment. And the people watched, cheered, believed, because to them this wasn't horror. It was order. Death wasn't the end. It was the price of harmony, and when drought came or the stars went silent, the altars ran red. But perhaps no civilization has haunted the imagination quite like the Egyptians. We admire their pyramids, their golden coffins, their gods with animal heads. But what we forget, what we sanitize, is how death consumed every breath of their lives. From the moment of birth, a pharaoh prepared to die. Tombs were built while the kings still lived. Slaves and workers toiled for decades, carving chambers designed not to be visited, but to trap time itself. The mummification process was grotesque and reverent. Organs pulled through incisions, the brain scraped out through the nose with a metal hook. The body, packed, salted, wrapped, eyes replaced with stones. And all of it so that the soul could find its way through the duat, the Egyptian underworld, a nightmare of serpents, demons, fire, lakes, and trials. You needed spells, amulets, instructions carved into your tomb walls just to survive it. Because death was not a release, it was a journey far more dangerous than life. But it wasn't only kings who feared what waited beyond. In medieval Europe, the church sold fear as salvation. People were told their bodies were wicked, that pain was holy. Flagellation became a ritual. Men whipped their own flesh to atone for sins whispered by corrupt priests. In monasteries, monks sewed their lips, waited shut in silence. In hidden crypts, corpses were dressed in robes and propped up as saints. Bones of martyrs were sold in markets, wrapped in velvet, kissed by the desperate. This was not faith. This was madness, weaponized, control disguised as worship. And always, always beneath it, death, watching, waiting, smiling. But not all darkness was cloaked in religion. Some was called medicine. In Renaissance Europe, women were diagnosed with hysteria, a wandering womb, they said. The cure? Burning, cutting, inserting devices soaked in wine or acid. Midwives were accused of witchcraft, dragged into public squares, stripped, tortured, drowned. And those who survived were shunned. History called them heretics. Today we call them healers. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was systemic, because those who knew too much, who healed without permission, threatened the delicate lives of the powerful. And it's not only the ancient past. In the 19th century, entire families were exhumed because of tuberculosis. In New England, people believed their dead were feeding on the living from beyond the grave. Bodies were dug up, hearts cut out and burned, ashes mixed into drinks and fed to the sick as a cure. These were not savages. These were villagers, clergy, neighbors, desperate for answers in a world that had stopped making sense. And what they did in fear became legend. There is a reason these stories survive in whispers, because they are not just about what happened, but about what could happen again. Humanity has always danced with darkness. We wear civilization like a costume, but beneath the fabric, the same hunger, the same fears, the same belief that blood can buy peace, that death can be controlled. That power, if dressed in ritual or crowned in gold, is sacred. But history is not sacred. It is a graveyard, and every time we look away, another secret sinks deeper into the dirt. So the next time you walk through an old ruin, or stand before a dusty painting of a forgotten king, listen closely. Not to the guides, or the plaques, or the textbooks, but to the silence, the air, the chill you feel though the sun is warm. That's not imagination.